Hello and welcome to the next edition of our New South Wales Life Members series. Today we're joined by a man who has touch judged almost 150 first grade games. He's been involved in multiple state of origins, test matches, he's officiated in 2 grand finals, and recently has been an active contributor in his local association in Illawarra. It's Brian Bonney. Brian, how are you?
I'm good, Daniel. How are yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Keeping busy here at my end. I've got a week to go till school holidays, and then I'll get a bit of a break from teaching, so that should be nice. How have you been? How have you been keeping yourself busy of late?
Basically, as I said, I've been pretty active with my kids. I've got 6 kids and 12 grandkids. So, with the COVID-19, basically, I've got a dog. So I basically walk my dog and look up, try and follow my kids' careers.
Okay. What are some of your other pursuits outside refereeing?
Basically, as you say, it's mainly following my 2 sons. One plays football and the other referees. So I've been trying to put a little bit back into their careers, and I've done a lot on my own. I've basically been following those 2 boys.
And what's your dog's name?
Buzz. Named after Buzz Lightyear from Star Wars.
And what type of dog is he?
It's a Shih Tzu Cavalier Cross.
Okay. I'm sure he keeps you busy.
He does. I can't go without walking him twice a day, especially when I first get up. And I try and walk him before it gets too cold in the evenings.
Now, we might head back just before we touch on your refereeing career. What was working life for you? What were some of the roles that you had throughout your career?
Well, I was a permanent firefighter with the New South Wales Fire Brigade for 39 years. And in between, because I was working shift work, I've been working with Linfox Armour Guard for 43 years.
Okay. They're very sort of active roles, I suppose.
Yeah, as I say, they're both completely different, but they're very rewarding in my life anyway, I've found. Dealing with people and, as I say, in the public, it's very rewarding.
And did you find that any of those experiences from your working life helped you in your refereeing career? Maybe, I suppose, relating to people, communicating to people, working as a team?
Yeah, I also I did national service for 2 years. Okay. In the army. So basically, that's where I got all my training. Basically, dealing with people, and as I say, it was a life rewarding experience being in the army. I tell you.
Yeah, I'm sure it certainly was. Now, you commenced your refereeing career with Illawarra Refs in 1983. Why did you decide to take up the whistle?
As I said, I played football, probably only an average footballer. I played well into my 30s, and when I decided to retire, I was going to try and take up coaching footballers, but because working shift work, it made it very hard. So my station officer at the time, Alan Brown, he is a life member of Illawarra. He basically said, well, why don't you take up refereeing? And I said at the time, well, I always gave referees a hard time when I was on the field. So I thought, well, I'll try it. And I wished I would have taken it up about 10, 15 years earlier.
Yep. So you started quite late, did you, in your career?
Yeah, I was probably in the mid-30s when I took it up.
Okay. And you touched on your playing. What position did you play as a player?
Everywhere from hooker to fullback. As I said, I was a jack of all trade. I wasn't a specialist at anything. I just loved playing rugby league.
Just loved the game. Now, you had some success in Illawarra. After refereeing the D grade grand final in 1984, you touch judged the 1985, 86 and 87 A-grade grand finals. How important were these early days in Illawarra for you?
Well, as I said, when I took up refereeing, I just thought I'd be happy running around in juniors, but as you climb the ladder, you get the hunger for the higher grades, and as I said, that's what basically happened. You don't, when you first start refereeing, you're not expecting any great goals to achieve, but I mean, if they come along, you gladly take them.
Yeah, you certainly do. Now, you were graded in 1988 as a touch judge with graded number 757. Can you talk to us a little bit about the events on field that led up to you grading in 88?
As I said, I was running around in the Illawarra doing third grade centres, second grade lines, and first grade lines every weekend. And Barry Keenahan, who is a great influence on my career in Illawarra, basically told me that that's as far as I'd get. I'd never get any higher than probably second grade, certainly not first grade. And he said at the time, he told me Dennis Braybrook was looking to grade specialist touch judges, and he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, it was a challenge." I thought, yeah, as I said, I'm not going anywhere in Illawarra that I've already received. I could have stayed probably in Illawarra and went on for another 10 or 15 years at that level. But I thought, well, I'd like a new challenge. So that's what I basically did. I thought, well, I'm going to start at the bottom again and see how far I could go.
Now, you were actually part of an influx of touch judges that were graded. In 1988, there were 22 officials graded, but it was sort of the first time where they brought in a whole heap of specialist touch judges into grade.
Yep. That's right, Daniel.
Who are some of the names that you remember out of that group?
I'm just trying to think. Most of the people that were there at the time, they were the same as me, starting at the bottom. But I can always remember going to our first training run at the old Henson Park and meeting all these people like Mick Stone, Steve Betts, Nick Ryan, Brian Gilchrist, Martin Weeks, Nick Howe. They were legends as far as I was concerned, and here I was mixing with legends. And the good thing about it, as you say, when we finished training, everyone went back to the Marrickville Tennis Club and had a few quiet ales before you turn around and drive home. And all those Mick Stone and all those top referees, they basically, took you on board, and made you feel so welcome.
Yep. Now, you work your way through the lower grades, and your debut as a first grade touch judge comes in round 18 of 1990. There was a match between Easts and South Sydney at Henson Park. Jeff Weeks was the referee. Do you remember much of the lead up to the game being formed of the appointment and then the experience itself?
Yeah, as I said, I looked around and I basically thought, well, I'm mixing with the elite people, and I didn't really feel, and I'm not trying to sound big-headed, but I just didn't feel that I was uncomfortable in mixing with these people and doing that higher grade. It just came natural to me. I didn't have any trouble doing it, and it was just like to me another game of rugby league, even though they were high at the highest level. But as you say, I didn't have any trouble mixing in those grades.
Now, being based down south, how did you find the balance between touch judging and working, especially seeing you had to travel from Illawarra multiple times a week?
It was very hard, because at the time I was graded with Giles O'Donnell, a good friend of mine, was graded before me, and he always told me when you go up to Sydney, you go to every training, you don't miss games, and basically that's what I did. I juggled my work in the fire brigade by taking part-time changes of shift. I took leave, and as I said, it turned out all the time that I was in Sydney, I didn't miss a training run. I didn't miss a game, and as I said, I enjoyed looking. I look forward to going to training. I didn't look forward to going to the fitness test because that was bloody hard.
Now, you mentioned a few names before. Who were some of those, not specifically active guys, but maybe coaches as well, who had a big influence on your career, coming from Illawarra right through to first grade?
Well, as I said before, there was Alan Brown, Barry Keenahan, Giles O'Donnell, and Alan Serkin, Brett Matthews, Steve Brown. Steve Brown was an excellent touch judge in Illawarra himself, done a lot of country appointments. That they basically were the people in Sydney. In Illawarra, but when I went to Sydney, it was basically Ian McCall and Max Tomset were the people that I got all my guidance and confidence from, because they themselves were two very excellent touch judges, and it turned out to be excellent touch judge coaches.
Yeah, they certainly were, and have very much a fantastic reputation and legacy in the game. Now, it must have been comforting for you to have the people that you mentioned, the group around you from Illawarra. There were quite a few active graded guys at the time. It must have been comforting to know you had that close support group.
Yeah, we were Illawarra at the time. We were a very close-knit an association. Giles used to run training sessions, and we'd have 20, 30 people from active to retired people that used to go to the old training venue, which is the Orb Bowling Club. There was a ground there, and we used to train there, play, and then finish it with a big game of touch football. And as you say, everyone were friends, and as you say, we still are to these days.
Now, who were some of the guys that you enjoyed keeping company with, and running with on the weekends?
There's quite a few. Greg McCallum, Kevin Russell was one person that I finished my career with, and Kevin Russell was a very good touch judge. I haven't seen him lately, but I know, as I said, I spent a lot of the last couple of years, because when I was in second grade, basically we were paired as a team, and we went through till we both retired. Dave Manson, Bill Harrigan, Kevin and Kelvin Jeffs, Steve Betts, as I mentioned before, Mick Ryan, Peter Ryan, Brian Gilchrist, Martin Weeks and Mick Howell. They were basically all, and Phil Curley, basically they were all really, our class is really good friends, because as you say, when we went away doing games and after training, we always went back, and I know they don't do it these days, but we always went back to either the tennis club or the whatever club or pub that was close, and we always had a few beers before we left to go home.
We'll touch on later on a game that towards the end of your career that you did with Kevin Russell, a grand final in the lower grades. But yeah, it worked out quite a bit then that you tended to run in groups for quite a while. I know leading up to one of your grand finals, you did quite a few weeks with Martin Weeks on the touchline as a pairing. So I think that's quite a good trait, or I suppose thing that they did back then that worked out quite well, building up those friendships and building up those partnerships. Now, your first taste of representative football comes in only your second year in first grade, when you're appointed as an in-goal touch judge for the 1991 City Country match at the SFS. What are your recollections of this experience?
At the time, as you say, that was my highest achievement. That day, I'm pretty sure it was City Country 1, City Country 2. And we did both games, if I remember rightly. And as you say, it was at the SFS, and it was just the start of when they brought out in-goal touch judges. And as I said, at the time, I thought that would probably be my highest achievement, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, I suppose that's quite a good thing in your career. You take that first step and you really cherish it, and then you don't know what's to come from then, like you said, but you certainly went on to much bigger and much better things from there on. Now, you participated in a couple of firsts throughout your first grade career, the first of which was travelling to Adelaide in 1991 to officiate in the inaugural game in the City of Churches. You travelled with Ian Parnaby and Cole White. The match was between the Dragons, St George Dragons, and Balmain. What was this experience like for you?
It was great because we went over as a team, and we stayed there for 3 or 4 days, if I remember rightly, and we got a very good bond with each other before we actually had to do the game. Did a lot of sightseeing, and we had a lot of fun mucking around and taking photos, and it was just great. And then we finished it after we done the state of the game. It was played in pouring rain, and there was a packed house. You couldn't see the people, but as you say, you knew they were there because you could hear them. And after that, we spent the weekend going into their junior football system, and coaching their referees.
Yep. From all reports, it was quite a successful first venture to South Australia. The reports, I remember there were newspaper article clippings saying how much of an impact it had there in the early days. How did you find those experiences backing up and helping out the local grades, coaching their referees over there? It was quite early on in rugby league terms for them. It was quite unfamiliar, I suppose.
It was really good because they were thirsting for knowledge, and basically they listened to every word you gave them in relation to coaching, and it was obviously they really appreciated people coming from Sydney coming in to look at them, and because they never had that type of coaching before, and you could tell that they really enjoyed it and they got a lot out of it.
Now, a year later in 1992, the Great Britain Lions came to Papua New Guinea, New Zealand and Australia to play test matches. They played numerous preliminary matches against opposition right across the country. They played teams in the country, they played teams in Queensland, and they played first grade teams throughout the state. You were fortunate enough to be appointed to touch judge the Great Britain versus Illawarra match in your own backyard at Wynn Stadium. This must have been a thrill for you early on in your career.
It certainly was. Any game that you do at Wynn Stadium is always a buzz, and to do a representative game between Illawarra and Great Britain, to me I was just over the moon. As you say, people in Illawarra recognise who you are and they know where you come from, so they tend to give you a bit of a hard time. I used to have nicknames like Heart Attack Material, Super Goose, and without even having to turn around, half the time I knew who the people were yelling because I recognised their voices from the local competition.
They were just
it was a town.
They were just your family members, weren't they?
Probably. They probably were.
Yeah. So it must have been nice for the town, I suppose, having international calibre of player coming and having quite a big event in the Gong.
Yeah, Illawarra, it's a very fickle place. They like winners, and as you say, when Illawarra are winning, or they follow them thick and thin. But when they lose, they seem to go to either basketball or soccer, whoever's winning at the time. I mean, we're very fickle people down here.
Now, 1992 proved to be a bit of a breakout year for yourself. In the New South Wales Rugby League Premiership, you officiated in the final series for the first time. You did matches between St George and Newcastle, and the match between St George and the Illawarra Steelers. And you were ultimately appointed to the reserve grade grand final between Balmain and North Sydney. Can you talk us through this period of your career?
Yeah, I think that year I was pretty lucky to get the reserve grade grand final, because I really think I got it out of the front, because at the time, I think it was Martin Weeks and Mick Howe were running first grade, and there was a game in Wollongong that was a bit controversy when Rod Wishart kicked a goal that wasn't a goal, and basically it ruled those two gentlemen who were excellent touch judges out of the first grade grand final, and it basically gave me an opportunity, I think, by defunct on that at that time, to run the second grade grand final, which I enjoyed immensely.
Yeah. Do you have many recollections of the reserve grade grand final? Graham Addersley was the referee. I think Gary Lee was the other touch judge. There was a couple of blues, as per the norm in reserve grade grand finals.
Yeah, as I said, football in those days, as you say, it was very challenging. If you could get through a game of football without any controversy, it was great. But as you say, it's football these days. I mean, I watch it, and as I say, they have a blue these days, and 26 players run in and push and shove, and there's never a punch thrown. But back in those days, you had to have your eyes open, because if players run in, there was always somebody who was going to throw one or two punches.
Yeah. And reserve grade was particularly strong back in those days. There were players that were fluctuating between grades on a weekly basis. It was really a strong, tough grounding for players.
And it certainly was for touch judges and referees too, because as you say, it's the quality of first and second grade. Even though first grade was higher than second grade, the standard of second grade was pretty was good, and it was pretty intense.
Yeah. Now, that was the first of a series of big matches, I suppose, for you at the SFS. I've got the SFS in the background here. A year later, you get appointed to the big game, your first grade grand final. Before talking about the week leading up to it and the game, how were you feeling about the 93 season after getting a taste of grand final day in 1992?
As I said, while I was in first grade, I enjoyed every minute of it. And as I said, every touch judge and referee in first and probably second grade were of a standard that they could do much higher than what they were in. So it was very challenging in relation to, even though we were all friends off the field, when we were on the field, it was pretty cutthroat, because everyone wanted your position or their position.
Yeah. And do you remember on the game itself, how were you notified? Do you remember some of the events in the week leading up to it? You get to be part of the festivities and the lead up to the game, and then how was the game for you?
Yeah, I was probably notified on the Tuesday morning by Mick Stone that I was appointed to the grand final, and the week of grand final is pretty full on. You go to a lunch with Mick Stone, which was usually one of the high class restaurants around the city. Very enjoyable. You usually go to the Carbine luncheon, which was very good, because a lot of the people that were at the Carbine lunches were very famous people, and you were sitting at the tables with these type of people and talking to them and getting a lot of their life experience. And then you finish it off on the Friday. I think it was the Friday morning. You went to the grand final breakfast and sat there, and lapped up the whole morning or the breakfast with the two sides and distinguished guests at the breakfast.
Yep. Now, Brisbane won the match itself. They were quite powerful. That was, of course, the second year going back to back after winning in 92. Do you remember much about the game itself?
Yeah, Daniel, I cried through the whole game, because I'm a mad St George Illawarra supporter. I have been since the 60s, when I used to go and sit at the cricket ground on my own and watch the Dragons play. As I said, I still am to this day a mad Dragons supporter. And run the line and to try and concentrate and cry at the same time. It was pretty hard.
Now, also in 1993, you get appointed to your first of 3 State of Origins. You're appointed to Game 1 of the 1993 series. This must have been a very special moment, particularly seeing that the game was up at Suncorp, all the hype around the games at that arena. Can you talk to us a little bit about this experience?
Yeah, I always tell this, Daniel. It's a story that I've told many times, but when I ran out onto the field along the touchline, I took my position at the corner post, and all of a sudden I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And I thought it was somebody standing behind me just rubbing their hand through my hair. And when I turned around, there was no one within 50 metres of me. And as I said, I always class State of Origins the pinnacle of a referee or a touch judge's career, because that's, to me, is it's so fully intense and the time just seems to go so fast from the kick-off to the final whistle, and there's just action from one end of the field to the other, Daniel.
Yeah. Yeah, I've spoken to many Life members recently, and they all mentioned that the fans, they're on you right from the start, from the moment you even arriving to the ground, going past the Caxton and whatnot, and then the actual change rooms, you have to go through the fans, so the atmosphere hits you straight away.
It certainly does. I remember the first time we did go past the Caxton, and as I said, it's they're like lunatics there. I mean, you couldn't walk down the street, I don't think, on your own if they knew who you were, because I think you'd have to be fighting people off left, right and centre.
Yep. Now, that was still in the days where there was one Queensland touch judge, one New South Wales touch judge. I suppose it would have been nice that you had Greg McCallum there as well to travel up with, a good friend.
Yes, it certainly was, mate. Greg, as I said, I've run quite a few games with Greg, and I can always tell you this story too. We had to go to Newcastle to do a game, and we both he drove me up, and basically we stopped along the way, and he provided breakfast. And as you say, it's they were the times when basically that's where you got your friendship from, on and off the field, especially off the field, Daniel.
Now, 1994 starts off well for you with the appointment to the then named pre-season competition, the Tooheys Challenge Cup final between Souths and Brisbane in Albury. You're appointed to the final again in 1995 between Cronulla and Brisbane. Again, it's at Albury. For those who don't really know, what was this competition like? You got to travel to quite a few regional places and areas as part of this competition.
Yeah, Daniel, the quality of them games basically were of a high standard. It was a pre-season competition, but all sides took it pretty seriously. They all wanted to win it, and as I say, that's the way they played. And going to the country centre, especially Albury, was another. I've never been to Albury before, and I haven't been there since, I'm sorry. But as you say, it was not that I didn't want to go there, it's just I haven't been back.
Yep. Now, there must have been quite a few games you did in quite hot conditions, particularly being quite early on in the year out in the regional areas.
Yeah, I can remember going to North Queensland, and basically the game was probably around 6 o'clock, but the humidity and the heat was so intense that, you know, as I said, it was just unbelievable, you know, like going from a pretty mild place in like Illawarra up to an area of Queensland, which, as you say, it's hard to describe, but I mean the conditions up there is very taxing on you and your body.
I suppose if you weren't fit from pre-season training, these pre-season Challenge Cup games certainly got you ready for the real thing.
Yeah, as I said, you couldn't rely on just your one training run in Sydney. I used to train with Illawarra, plus I used to do my own. I used to basically train 7 days a week. I either do road running, going to gyms while I was working. But as you say, you just could not rely on just doing one training session. You had to basically do it 7 days a week.
Now, you achieve a commendable feat by going back to back and being appointed to the first grade grand final in 1994. How are your feelings at this time, particularly going back to back? I mean, it would have been an extreme high to get that first grand final, but to be fortunate enough to do a second.
Yeah, as I said, I was over the moon when I received the appointment again from Mick Stone, and it was to relive all the things that we did the first year by going, as I said, to Mick Stone's lunch, which was mandatory, the carbine lunch again, and also the grand final breakfast. As I said, it was. I think it was better the second time because you knew basically what to expect, but it was still very enjoyable doing both grand finals and grand final weeks.
Yeah. It must have been nice too. I suppose I know we want close games, but this game, the second game in particular, was a blowout. In the end, Canberra ran away with it and won quite comfortably. There wasn't much controversy. I mean, we'll see a bit of footage in a moment. I know you came on for an incident early on in the game, but that was 100% correct. It must have been nice to, in a way, be able to sit back and enjoy the second grand final and soak up the atmosphere of what was going on around you.
Yeah, that game ended up being Mal Meninga's last game, and I think it was Terry Lamb's probably last game or close to it. And the incident you're talking about now, Woodsy, who was a referee touch judge with grade now, always, every time I see him, they always bring, I think it was Kenny Nagus, was the bloke I came in and report, and Kenny Nagus still reckons I got it wrong, I was wrong, but I still reckon I was right. And to this day, every time I see Kenny Nagus and Woodsy, they basically give it to me. But as I said, I still stand by what I did. To me, it was pretty blatant, and it had to be reported.
Yeah, no, I think looking at it first time around, it's pretty clear cut. It was the right decision. Certainly was. It was particularly interesting seeing the game a few weeks beforehand between the two clubs was such a tight affair. It went to extra time, and I think a Darryl Halligan field goal ended up winning the match.
Yeah, as I said, you can't pick your grand finals. You expect, you hope that you have a close grand final that's very enjoyable. But as you say, you can't pick it. And most of their battles are usually pretty close. And I was very surprised that it was so one-sided.
Now, you touch judge your fully fledged first test match in 1994 when Australia absolutely trampled France at Parramatta Stadium. You did a second test match in 1995 when Australia played New Zealand at Suncorp. How did you find the standard of international football? And how did you find the experiences working with different referees? You worked with two New Zealand referees on both occasions, Dennis Hale and then Phil Houston.
Yeah, Daniel, the standard at the time, international football was not up to the standard that I think it is today. As you say, without Great Britain, it basically only left the other two countries. And I think because Australia was so dominant and their players were so dominant, it was just very hard to class it as something you could probably remember, even though it's a great honour to do a test match. It's just that, the standard at that time, I don't think was up to international standard.
Yep. I suppose you still would have looked back on it with fond memories, though, having such good names all on the park together in one team, like Meninga, Stewart, Sirinen, and those kind of names working together on the same side. Must have sit back and marvel at some of the play.
Yeah, as I said, the players from 1 to the 13 or 17 or whatever it is, were all great players. And as you say, the Australian side in those 2 years were just so dominant. And just to sit back and marvel at some of their skills and things that they could do was, so rewarding.
Now, in 1995, we touched on earlier about a first, but you're a participant in another rugby league first, when the Auckland Warriors make their entry into the first grade competition at Ericsson Stadium against the Broncos. We spoke to Steve Betts earlier on in the series, who described the atmosphere as one of the best matches he's been involved in. What are your memories of this trip to New Zealand with Steve Betts and Bill Harrigan was the referee?
Yeah, the whole experience was mind-boggling to go over there with those two great gentlemen, great referee and a great touch judge, to do the first game in Auckland was unbelievable. The game itself was so intense. I can remember when the Warriors came out, they come out of the tunnel, and there's a little tunnel there, they come out and they had all these flames blowing, hot air, fire. And as you say, you could feel it. You could feel your skin burning. The crowd loved it. The game was full on. The after functions were great. We ended up going up to the top of the grandstand after the game, which has got an entertainment area, the whole length of the grandstand, and we met players and officials there, and we really enjoyed ourselves. And it's something that I'll never ever forget, that game, because it was such a great week. And as I said, we finished it off by after the game, I think we ended up going to the races before we caught our plane home. But it was a great experience going over there with those two men.
I remember watching a documentary recently on the Warriors, and they highlighted this match. The lead up to it was immense. The crowd, they'd been longing for a team of their own to support, and then the pre-game entertainment. There were army rifles shooting. There was explosions everywhere. It was something out of a blockbuster movie. But they almost got them, the Warriors, in that game. If it wasn't for Alan Langer at the end with a bit of brilliance, the Warriors would have been first up winners.
Yeah, well, as I said, I thought that the whole game the Warriors were going to win. But as I say, it just took something brilliant from Alfie Langer to turn the tide. But as you say, I honestly think a draw probably would have been the best result, because they both deserved to win, and I don't think anyone deserved to lose.
Well, they certainly came back wanting more, did the Warriors fans. Now, as alluded to earlier, you go on to touch judge 2 further State of Origins. You touch judge Game 3 in 1995, again at Brisbane, and then your final Origin match is in Sydney in Game 2 of 1996. It's an interesting contrast in these two series. Queensland won 95 3-0, and then New South Wales win the series 3-0 in 1996. You would have been very excited to be involved again.
Yeah, I was, because at the time, I think it was the time of the Super League, and Queensland in the first series were coached by Fatty Vaughton, and I think we all know the tales of the Fatty Vaughton coaching era. And I think the second one was coached by Phil Gould, and as I said, they were pretty good series in relation to. I mean, State of Origin is always very, as I said before, very intense, and you really enjoy doing it compared to, and I'm sorry to say, I class State of Origin higher than grand finals and test matches, because of the intensity from first whistle to the last whistle.
Yep. Now, we talk about the Suncorp and Lang Park atmosphere and experience. You did that for your first 2 games. It must have still been nice to come back and have one in Sydney, close to home, to finish off.
Yeah, Daniel, because of the standard of touch judging at the time, everyone in first grade was capable of doing a grand final in a state of origin. And and if you got one in 1 year, whereas now, you seem to go on and keep doing it till somebody knocks you off.
Yep.
But up in that time, everyone was up to the standard of doing state of origin. So if you got one in 1 year, you were doing good. I was lucky enough to do 3 in 3 years, and at the time, I think that was all you could basically do. Because everyone else deserved to go, and they did look after everyone because, as I say, the standard was so high in touch judging.
I think that's a testament to your consistency as a touch judge, and I hope that you look back on that with great pride.
Yeah, there's a lot of I can look back on my career. As I said, it's a shame when it all comes to an end, because when you're on the merry-go-round, you really enjoy it because it is so much fun. It's hard work, but it's so much fun. You meet so many great people, and as you say, you have so much good times on and off the field, Daniel.
Yeah. Now we're heading towards the end of your on-field career. Your last first grade game comes in 1997, but this is not the end. You continue to achieve success in the twilight of your career. In 97, you touch judged the Metropolitan Cup Grand Final between Newtown and Guildford. In 1998, you repeated that, this time between Wentworthville and Kellyville. You also did some second grade Metropolitan Cup Grand Finals. Do you remember much about these Metropolitan Cup experiences?
Being in second grade, and as I said, when they came back with the amalgamation from Super League, they took half the referees from the New South Wales comp and half from Super League, and it was very hard to get back into first grade. So at the time, that was the highest honour we could do, and I enjoyed it because I knew that was the best we could do at the time.
Yeah. It must have been good working with some of the younger guys, though, that were coming through at that stage, helping them get a grounding in that competition to I suppose, use it as a leapfrog forward into future success.
It was, working with those people. It's you always try. I always try and help people with their coaching, and try and tell them what I think. Whether it's right or wrong, it's up to the individual to take that on board. If they do, well, so be it. If they don't, well, I just move on. I don't, I'll freely give my advice. I always will, and I have, and I always will.
Now, you had further success in grade with the 1998 President's Cup Grand Final between Canterbury and Parramatta, which we'll see on screen in a moment, and then the 1999 Jersey Flegg Grand Final between Canterbury and Newcastle. This was the game we were talking about, the Parramatta game that you did with Kevin Russell. There was a bit of a blue, or actually not a bit of a blue, a huge blue in one corner. I think all players were involved. Mark Oaten was the referee. Can you tell us a little bit, or run us through the twilight of your career coming into your retirement?
Probably at that time, as I said before, you always like to think that you'll go on forever, and it wasn't. I didn't think my time for retiring was coming, but it's the same as everything. It comes, and I think my family were the people that basically. I had two young kids, and I needed, to be with them, and that basically brought on my early retirement. I probably would have been still going around for another year or so, but because I enjoyed doing what I was doing, and I was still holding my place in the second grade competitions, and I thought again, fitness test. I think probably killed me in the end. I just found it hard to get through it.
Yep. And on this particular game itself, do you have recollections of this incident?
Yeah, I was on the far side away from the melee, but it definitely was something I'll never forget. as I said, I think it probably would have started 10 metres in from Kevin's side, and it did eventuate with all 26 players running in, and it ended up over to the fence near the spectators. Yep. Basically, after the game, we both gave our reports. There was players from both sides cited, and even one bloke from Canterbury, he was a New Zealand resident, and he ended up going back to New Zealand and didn't front the panel. And I think the last I heard, he ended up playing rugby union, but he didn't. He was suspended for playing rugby league until he fronted the panel, but he never fronted it.
Yep. Now, it would have been nice. I know I've spoken to you away from this forum, but a year later when you did the 99 Jersey Flegg Grand Final, it was good to work with someone like Tony Archer, who was early on in his career.
Yeah, I think I'm not saying carried, but we worked with Tony Archer in his early infancy as a referee. And as I said, I think Kevin and myself hopefully gave him a lot of encouraging coaching in relation to refereeing, which I think we did.
Yeah, and he certainly went on to achieve many things.
He certainly did.
Now, since your retirement from grade, you have given back to your local association and have actively run lines for a couple of years. How did you find this? I'm sure many of the younger referees benefited from the experience that you passed on during those matches.
Yeah, as I said, it was always my intention to go back to my local association to finish my career. I did do that, and as I said, my role now is basically coaching. I like to be able to coach referees and touch judges that are coming through, and as I said, that was, and also my son basically then was taking up refereeing, so I always wanted to run lines with my son, which I eventually did. I think one of the photos there is at the local park, Reed Park, that day where I'm running with my son. I think my son might have been the referee at the time.
Okay. So you're a life member of Illawarra Referees, having served in several roles, including president for a sustained period. What does the recognition of life membership mean to you?
Life membership, well, as I said, it's the pinnacle of anyone's career to receive life membership to anything. When you start out, that's not your goal. Basically, my goal at the time was I enjoyed refereeing, I enjoyed rugby league. Everything after that I achieved, I enjoyed doing, but to receive life membership of Illawarra and New South Wales is the ultimate thing you could receive. Anyone could bestow on somebody.
Now, your efforts in Illawarra have been further recognised. In 1987, you won the Ned David Award. That must have been a nice award to win, particularly with the prestige around the award.
Yes, David, I won that twice over a period of quite a few years. Ned David at the time was a legend in the Illawarra Referees Association, and that was the highest honour you could receive other than life membership, was to receive the Ned David Award. There's been a lot of very influential members of Illawarra have received it either once or twice, but as I say, to receive that is an ultimate.
Now, on the lighter side, you enjoyed the social aspect of Illawarra and often became the source of entertainment for members. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, some people think I should have been a girl, but as I said, I was always the one that we used to have. At our annual dinner every year, we had the Back Chat Awards, and Steve Brown and Mark Crampton would get dressed up, and then I'd basically get dressed up as a woman, and we would then hand out awards to members that they probably didn't want to receive. But yeah, as I said, it was good fun doing that.
You touched on it before. You've contributed at district level, but post your retirement, you've also had coaching as the touch judge coach for the grade squad from 2002 to 2005. How did you find the transition going from the active ranks into coaching?
It wasn't hard because it's something that I have a lot of passion for. And at the time, Les Matthews asked me, and Dennis Baggerino were interested in being applying for touch judge coach, and I didn't hesitate. I was following in the steps, as I said before, of Max Tomset and Ian McCall, who were legends, and I just wanted to have a crack at another challenge, and it basically was another challenge. And working with these people was great enjoyment.
Yeah, it's these I suppose these contributions, as well as the time you served on the advisory and appointments board, that lead you to the outstanding recognition of life membership in 2007 with the New South Wales referees. We touched on Illawarra, but it must have been extremely rewarding to achieve life membership of New South Wales.
Yeah, as I said, I've touched on before, Daniel. When you start out, you don't seek those glories, but when it comes, you just embrace it because it's such an honour to be life members of those two great associations. And as I said, to have your family and your friends there on the night when you received it is unbelievable.
Now, refereeing, as you mentioned, is a bit of a family affair. Your son Mitchell is currently an active referee. How's it being on the other side, being a parent of a referee?
Yeah, it's I always hopefully give the guidance, the right guidance to my kids. Both, as I said, one plays football, the other referees. I usually go and watch both play. Mitchell, I go along and after the game, I give my 2 bobs worth. Sometimes he's happy, sometimes he's not, but I try and be honest with him because it's his career that I'm trying to influence. And I still reckon he is a great referee, touch judge on his own right.
Further recognition comes your way. In 2010, you're awarded the New South Wales Rugby League Les Matthews Volunteer of the Year Award. This must have been nice, particularly seeing Les was someone that you worked a lot under and worked with throughout your career in many roles.
Yeah, that was a great night going to that function. I went there with my partner, and as we parked the car, we got out and, to walk into there where you see so many people that have done so many great things in grassroots for either refereeing, playing, coaching. There's just so many different type of people in their walks of life that they're recognised on the night.
Being extremely fortunate to be a fellow recipient, I can only reiterate that. I remember going on the night and hearing all the different stories from, as you said, players, coaches across the various districts. I think it's an excellent function and an excellent concept to reward those who are doing great things for our great game. As discussed, you've done a lot of coaching of referees since your retirement and maintained involvement also as a NRL and New South Wales interchange official. What's next for you and your plans for refereeing?
Well, everyone probably think I'm a dinosaur and I should be put down. But as I said, I still enjoy doing interchange. I still enjoy doing coaching. And as long as those two associations still want me to do it, I'll do it because I still get great enjoyment out of doing both.
And you mentioned to me on the side you had aspirations this year of being involved, which COVID has put a bit of a stop to. Do you want to outline those intentions?
Yeah, towards the end of the season last year, I was asked by the Group 7 Referees Association would I be interested in coming on and help on the advisory panel. And working with Craig Jones and Peter Ryan. And as I said, being involved with Group 7 last year with my son, I thought, yeah, why not? If I could bid something back to Group 7 Referees Association and their members, it would fulfil my appetite for things.
Now, I've been asking all Life members before we finish off throughout this series, what is the most important thing that they've gotten out of refereeing? What would be that for Brian Bonney?
The most important thing I've got out of refereeing is the friendships I've made, the great times, especially the grand final lunch, the Life members' lunch, meeting up with the old people you haven't seen for years, sometimes a year. Barry Braybrook is, Barry Goldsworthy, sorry, is one person I really enjoy meeting up with, to have a few beers, and we have many a tale to tell while we're in each other's company.
Yeah, I definitely think that refereeing is unique in the friendships that we form throughout our career. Certainly brings people together, and those bonds are extremely, extremely strong. Now, to finish off our Fast Five, barbecue or tomato sauce?
Barbecue.
Ford or Holden?
Holden.
You touched on this throughout the interview. State of Origin or Grand Final?
State of Origin.
Beach or snow?
Beach.
And lastly, money or free time?
Money.
At least you're honest. Thank you for your time today, Brian. You've had a very, very distinguished career and have given great service to the game. All the best for the future, and look after yourself. We have only one episode left for this series of New South Wales Referees Life Member Series. I wonder who will be next. We'll find out next week. So make sure everyone tunes in next time, and bye for now. Thank you for your time, Brian, and stay safe and look after your family.
Thank you, Daniel, for everything you've done, mate.
No worries at all. It's been an absolute pleasure sitting here, chewing the fat for the last hour and hearing some of your great stories. You've got plenty of knowledge to pass on, and it's good to see that you're still involved at the game, in the game at various levels. I'll be in touch.
Thank you, Daniel.